Good. There we go. I will resume that. Is now being recorded, and we will share a recording of the webinar after by email after the meeting. So next slide, please. So I think everyone knows that the CCS Action Network is a national network of grassroots groups, environmental organizations, and community leaders working together to challenge dangerous carbon capture infrastructure at every stage, from capture to transportation to the sequestration projects. Over the last year, we've seen communities across the country organize in powerful ways to challenge these projects, raise safety concerns, raise transparency concerns, fight to protect landowner rights, and most importantly, demand safer policies for CO2 projects. The CCS Action Network was formed because groups advocating for CO2 safety saw the need for collective action and, again, more importantly, the need to support communities on the ground in these fights. There was also a recognition that at the federal level, there was one key policy that was kind of the driver of all of the policy of all of the projects that were going forward, and that's the 45Q tax credit. Boo, we all hate that one. But that is what we know is keeping in what is making these projects profitable for the industry. So together, we have had some incredible wins this year. As you can see on the screen, we have had the CCS Action Network has done incredible things like postponing a key Senate hearing. Together, we sent thousands of emails to congressional offices, made thousands of calls into offices as well. We've had dozens of constituent meetings with offices all over the country where industry is pushing to expand CCS. And most impressively, we have had tens of thousands of people all sign petitions demanding that elected officials protect them and their community. The topics that we advocated around this year included preventing criminalization for pipeline organizing, increasing CO2 safety, allowing states to maintain control of and local jurisdiction, and what a lot of us spent a lot of our time doing last year, demanding that the 45Q tax credit be repealed. And as you can see on the screen there, my favorite action or accomplishment from the CCS Action Network this year was getting to participate and see all of the over 40 community members and landowners that were brought to DC to advocate for themselves and use their own voice with their lawmakers and share about their concerns with CO2. So these actions are not nearly all of the tactics that have been used to stop CCS over the last year and through the CCS Action Network. So for the remainder of our webinar tonight, we are going to be hearing updates from organizers working on the ground in communities that a lot of these communities don't always seem similar or seem to have a lot of similarities, but time and time again, we see that concern around CO2 comes up in every community where a project is proposed. So as you hear the folks who are fighting these fights tonight, I hope sorry, you'll hear folks tonight who have been fighting for many years, and you'll hear some folks who are just beginning to organize their communities because of a new project announcement. And wherever your community lands on that spectrum, I hope that you're able to hear one common lesson throughout all of these stories and take it with you. When communities organize together, we can influence policy, we stop harmful projects, and we protect our neighbors. So with that, I hope to dive in, and I'm going to turn it over to our first presenters from California. So first, we're going to start our journey in California, where community and environmental justice groups have successfully won a moratorium at the state level against CO2 pipelines and have been engaging the state regulator as it develops a CO2 safety rule. Um, and with that, I'll turn it to Isabel Penman, who is the Northern California organizer for Food and Water Watch, and Mercedes Macias, who is the senior policy advocate for the Sierra Club's, the Sierra Club's California chapter. Over to you two.
Thanks so much, Haley. I'll pass it to Mercedes to kick us off.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone so much for having me. Sierra Club has been a little bit of a wonky participant in the Action Network and the movement at large on CCS, but nonetheless, we have I think all of us have done amazing work in California. So I can go ahead and highlight some of the lay of the land. So yeah, we in California environmental groups saw as many as 2 dozen CCS projects proposed in California. We saw that these projects were being moved forward incredibly quickly and how they were located in areas like Kern County. I know we have some Kern County folks here, where it's already seeing such poor air quality, poor water quality. It's a really disadvantaged community and really lacking in protections from industry. We're also seeing it in the Delta area as well. I think Isabel can speak more to that. But for California, you'd think, well, California is so progressive. We really have our stuff together and we know what we're doing, especially when it comes to the future of climate protections. Unfortunately, CCS has been the main focus and driving force for our California Air Resources Board scoping plan. So it's a major part of meeting our climate goals, unfortunately. So the narrative has been that way. And has been shifting towards accepting CCS as the future of fighting climate change. And that's unfortunate. So we are seeing that our fight is in a narrative way. It's in really uplifting frontline voices. It's in education of um, legislative experts. We're trying to make sure that they have access to all of the research and everything that they need. But CCS has those that are being proposed in California, a lot of them are in oil fields, like in Kern County. So it's just really a tax incentive for oil and gas industries just to continue polluting. And then we'll just a quick preview. We've seen some potential legislative projects in which enhanced oil recovery might be a thing this legislative session, unfortunately. But let me go ahead and pass it on to Isabel to talk more about our wins.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mercedes. It was a great overview of kind of the context, political context of carbon capture and storage in California. A large part of what we've been working on in the past year has to do with the specific bill, SB 614. Since 2022, California had a partial moratorium or ban on CO2 pipelines until the federal government updated their regulations on CO2 pipelines. However, last year we got word that the industry was pushing through a bill, which was SB 614, that would prematurely lift that moratorium before the federal government updated new regulations, and basically greenlight a bunch of carbon capture dumping projects across the state. And as Mercedes, mentioned, even though we know that the oil industry was really behind this push, unfortunately, a lot of Democratic and usually environmental climate leaders were also pushing for the use of carbon capture and storage as a way to meet our climate goals. As you can see from this quote, our governor Newsom has, talked about this technology as a necessary tool in our toolbox to meet our climate goals, which is extremely frustrating. So immediately we, band together and strongly opposed this effort to push through a bill that would prematurely lift the moratorium on CO2 pipelines. We knew it was really just kind of a giveaway to big oil to greenlight their projects. Like Mercedes has mentioned, there's already over 24 projects that have applied for their first permits to begin building. And so we worked together to set up lobby meetings with state representatives to educate them on what carbon dumping actually is and the harms to our communities, especially environmental justice communities that have been harmed by oil and gas extraction for decades and are now seeing these projects being proposed in their backyards. We submitted several letters. We did phone banks and webinars to educate community members on this dangerous push, especially as Mercedes mentioned, a lot of this is about shifting that narrative in California that we don't need carbon capture and storage, and it's actually a climate scam, and really an unproven technology that doesn't work. At the same time, while we were kind of doing that outside fight to oppose this bill. We had some partners in the Central Valley, which again, that's where Kern County is located for those who may not know, and is an environmental justice community that's overly burdened by oil and gas extraction already. They did amazing work working with the bill authors to make it as less bad as possible. So some wins that the bill ended up including because it did end up passing last October was that it had to be as protective as the Biden era's regulations. So basically, right before Biden left office, his administration put out drafts to updating the federal regulations on CO2 pipelines. So this bill required that California's had to be at least as protective as those ones. We also one language that required that all CO2 pipelines must be purpose-built, which basically means you can't take a pipeline that was built for oil and just start transporting CO2, which is a good thing because that's a major safety hazard. And then also required that the our state's Air Resource Board give credit for carbon moving through pipelines. Or sorry, in order for companies to get credit through our state tax incentives for carbon moving through pipelines, all of the pipelines within that operator must meet the state standards. And then also it gives the Office of the State Fire Marshal the power to shut down a pipeline if there's a rupture. And then it requires the lead agency to prepare an environmental impact report that complies with our state's basically environmental analysis on CO2 pipelines, which is just like stronger standards for the environmental analysis and ability for communities to engage in that process. However, we did have some losses, mainly that our moratorium that we had on CO2 pipelines was lifted, which is what the industry really wanted. So I think SB 614 passing in general is mostly a loss for us because it does greenlight a bunch of projects across the state and is going to allow them to move forward. Um, and then also a really big thing that our allies in the Central Valley fought hard for were setbacks, which basically is concrete language within the bill that says you can't build these pipelines this close to communities. We know the harms and risks of a pipeline leak, and putting them within miles of schools and hospitals and our communities is just should be non-negotiable. Unfortunately, industry did not let that happen. So the best thing that they were able to include in the bill was prohibition on building pipelines where there are sensitive receptors, which is basically hospitals, schools where people live, unless the harm is within an acceptable range as determined by the lead agency, which is as close as they could get to the idea of setbacks. And it basically means that hopefully the lead agencies, which are usually cities and counties where these projects are being proposed, will determine that there is no acceptable range of risk where there's pipelines next to communities. So we're going to have to continue to fight that every time that a project is proposed. But that's one thing that we wanted to get and we weren't able to. So right now, that bill just passed last October, and it charges the Office of the State Fire Marshal to, officialize these rules and put them out by July of this year, regulations on CO2 pipelines, including all of those, things that I just talked about. And so we're using this as an opportunity to make sure that the Office of the State Fire Marshal makes those regulations as protective as possible, that they hear our concerns over some of the issues that I just stated, and makes them as protective as possible for our community. So this is a screenshot of one of our letters that we've submitted to the Office of the State Fire Marshal, and we're going to continue to engage in that process and turn people out for public engagement hearings as they continue in the next couple of months. So yeah, some things that California is really focused on right now is the Office of the State Fire Marshal, and they're writing those regulations on CO2 pipeline safety, making sure that they're as strict and protective as possible, fighting the narrative that this carbon dumping technology is necessary to meet our climate goals because we know that's not true, and then just supporting individual site fights throughout California. And that's it.
Amazing. Thank you, Isabel and Mercedes. It's been so inspirational to watch the work in California. And I think many people know this, but it's kind of one of the first states where a moratorium was announced and kind of yeah, was just a great example of what the power that states have to protect their communities. So excited to watch where the fire marshal rules go and all the advocacy that you guys do around that. So thank you guys all for joining and anyone from California who joined us tonight. So next we are going to swing over to the Midwest and hear from our friends in Iowa, which has been one of the strongest and biggest hubs around CO2 pipeline fights in the country. They have fought a multi-state campaign to stop the Summit pipeline, and this campaign brought together landowners, farmers, advocates to all stand up to protect their land and their communities. So to hear more about that fight, we're going to turn to Emma Schmidt, who is a director at the Pipeline Safety Hub with the Bold Alliance, where she connects landowners, communities facing unwanted pipelines with legal, organizational, and technical resources. Emma, we'd love to hear from you next.
Normally, Haley, when people introduce me, they mention my charming good looks. So I'm a little disappointed that you left that out, but otherwise,
Sorry.
it's all good. No. All right. So, yep, I'm Emma Schmidt. And like Haley was saying, for the past 5 years now, we have been fighting Summit Carbon Solutions, which is a proposed 2,500 mile long pipeline across 5 Midwestern states, which is intended to transport 18.5 million metric tons a year of carbon dioxide captured from these ethanol plants. Primarily in Iowa, but also Nebraska, Minnesota, South Dakota, and one in North Dakota, and dump all of this CO2 at a dump site in North Dakota. The project was originally meant to be operational way back in 2024, but obviously we're in 2026, and the company seems to still be scrambling to come up with a viable plan. So that's good news. I'll just give you a few quick facts about the project, where it stands in each state, and kind of how we've managed to fend these guys off. If we want to go to the next slide. All right, so first off, I am mostly going to focus on Iowa just because that is where we still have the most room for forward momentum, I would say. It's also where the majority of the capture points and pipeline are proposed to be located. But just to give you a general idea of what has been publicly proposed, this is, the entire footprint of the proposed pipeline route. Although I will say, it seems like all we do is win, 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 no matter what. So this route is definitely subject to change. If we want to go to the next slide. Awesome. So, like I said, we're talking about a pipeline moving 18.5 million metric tons of CO2, 12 million tons of that from Iowa ethanol plants across 49 of our 99 counties here in Iowa. The pipe size ranges between 4 inches way up in North Dakota, up to 24 inches across Iowa. Summit Carbon Solutions is the corporation that is proposing this project. It is essentially the brainchild of Harold Hamm and Bruce Rastetter. Harold Hamm is an Oklahoma fracker. He is basically who brought fracking to North Dakota. He is a billionaire, like the 63rd wealthiest man in the world. And just between us, I think he looks like a man with dangerously high cholesterol. Just my personal opinion. But he's a powerful guy, and he also happens to be pals with an Iowan named Bruce Lee Rastetter, who is the founder of Summit Carbon Solutions. Now, Summit Carbon, along with around 100 of its offshoot LLCs like SCS Carbon Transport, SCS Carbon Storage, is the driver of the project. And of course, you might have to wonder why they're operating so many LLCs. A cynic might suggest that, it's because they're trying to avoid pesky things like transparency and liability, but that would be ridiculous because we all know Summit's ethics, like all pipeline companies, are of the highest caliber. Now, Summit has never released all of its investors, but we know there's at least 400 to 500 of them. Summit has shared a few names, so those include people like Harold Hamm and his oil company, Continental Resources, John Deere, Tiger Infrastructure, and TPG Rise. And of course, there's SKENS, which is a South Korean company that has in the past defrauded the US government. But we don't need to talk about that. If we go to the next slide, what we have been talking about and what has led to major wins in states across the proposed pipeline route is eminent domain and property rights. So the top reason that people are opposed to this project at least in our area, is around property rights. Just because a corporation should not be allowed to take your property for its own private profit against your will. End of story, right? In Iowa, as you can kind of see from this map, Summit has been granted eminent domain rights along the 688 miles of pipeline that was originally proposed back in 2021. But since then, they've added an additional 300 miles that they're trying to get a permit for, and they do not have eminent domain rights over that over those properties. So for the original project, Summit requested actually eminent domain over 29% of the route, which is a massive number. That's nearly 850 parcels of land. And for context, the largest carbon dioxide pipeline that currently operates is around like 570 miles. So that's about 100 miles less than what Summit's original route in Iowa was proposing. That 570-mile long pipeline, they only needed eminent domain powers over 6 families. So this is just a truly unprecedented taking. 850 parcels compared to 6 families of a, generally similar pipeline. And of course, it's not just Iowa. In North Dakota, Summit still needed around 200 parcels when their pipeline permit was approved. In South Dakota, they can't use eminent domain now, but when they could, only around 40% of the route had agreed to sign an easement after 3+ years of relentless effort on Summit's part. So, amazing stuff. If we go to slide 4, I think that's 4 anyways. The major reason why people haven't signed easements and why we've been able to have all these wins is because of this 3-pronged approach that we've taken to fight the project. So starting with landowner organizing, we've seen again and again that the number one thing that you can do to resist a project is to keep people united. And don't let them be, steamrolled by corporations. So keeping people together and active on the local level, having them turn out to supervisor or commissioner meetings, pushing for county ordinances, passing resolutions in their local political party platforms, and just talking to their neighbors has made a huge difference. And then, of course, we have the legal side, which goes hand in hand with landowner resistance because landowners are united in a large legal co-op, and they have a strong support system, not only from the attorney that's representing them, but also from each other. And it makes fighting these projects in court easier when we can back up the legal strategy with on-the-ground organizing. Not to mention, it does make it a bit easier on the pocketbook when the legal fees are split between hundreds of people instead of just 1 or 2. And I'll get to more specifics on the lawsuits that we've seen filed on the next slide, but last thing is, we can organize landowners and community members. We can file lawsuits. We can do all the things. But if we don't change the laws, we're just kicking the can down the road, right? Until the next project is announced. And so then we just have to rinse and repeat. So we have that 3rd prong, which is, the legislative strategy in the hopes that we can change the laws so we don't have to keep rinsing and repeating. And, like I was kind of getting at, none of these prongs truly work without the other. So hopefully if you remember anything from me running my mouth tonight, it's that you really need local organizing, a legal strategy, and legislative reform to fight these carbon schemes. Next slide, please. All right, so what's happening in all the other states beyond Iowa? In Minnesota, they have essentially no eminent domain. It's not written into their law that carbon pipelines can't use eminent domain, but it also doesn't say they can. So they have had submitted a permit application for 28 miles just up in like the northern part of Minnesota into North Dakota. That has been approved. But they also have 200 miles of proposed pipeline that they haven't even applied for. So that is a long process that they haven't even started. In Nebraska, they don't have an oversight agency like most states. They don't have, like a public service commission, public utilities commission, anything like that. It's up to the county commissioners to approve permits. And so far, they are staying strong, staying with landowners, and Summit hasn't gotten very far. In South Dakota, like I mentioned earlier, they no longer have eminent domain. They were able to elect leaders into their legislature and pass a law that bans eminent domain for CO2 pipelines. Summit has had their pipeline permit application denied on 2 separate occasions, and at this point, they really don't have a route proposed that they could get through South Dakota. So that's when I was talking about the map and how this is, what they put out, probably subject to change. It's because they can't even get through South Dakota right now. And if you can't get through South Dakota, you probably can't get to North Dakota, which we just had really good news from North Dakota. And that is that landowners appealed the permit that Summit was granted regarding the injection and storage of CO2, and they won. A judge has ruled that the North Dakota law that allowed this permit to be granted was unconstitutional. Now, the legislature could go back and, just change how they wrote the law and, maybe things will, happen, and they can just get the permit back. But that is, at least almost a year away, if that. So at the very least, we have delayed, 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 if not outright won. And then we're also in the process of appealing the pipeline permit that was granted in North Dakota. And that is, we have our final brief due next month, and we should have oral arguments in like early summer. So stay tuned because we're not done fighting in North Dakota or any of these other states. Next slide. Now, for Iowa specifically, we are still fighting, like South Dakota, to get a ban on eminent domain for CO2 pipelines. We passed a bill in the House earlier this year. The Senate is stalling. The Senate has never been our friend, but we do still have several weeks to get a bill to the governor's desk, and I'm hopeful that we will get there. We're also in the process of dealing with the oversight agency, the Iowa Utilities Commission, where we have appealed the pipeline permit that they granted back in 2024, but also they are trying to now not only amend the permit that they have, but trying to consolidate it with a bunch of unpermitted pipelines that they've now proposed. So it's kind of a convoluted situation, but basically we are just waiting on the oversight agency to move forward with things, and we're going to continue fighting. Next slide. All right, and last slide, so then I can quit talking. Basically, if you are in Iowa, if you're not in Iowa, we will take all the support we can get. We're asking people to submit an objection with the Iowa Utilities Commission, just saying that, hey, this pipeline is a bad project. We don't need it in Iowa. It doesn't benefit anybody except for, the wealthy elite. If you are a landowner in Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, wherever, join the landowner legal co-op that we formed. The Iowa easement team is what we're known as. Give us a Google. You can file for intervention so you can actually engage in the permitting process. And if you don't know how, we are happy to talk more offline about how you can do just that. And of course, write to your legislator and help us get this bill to ban eminent domain to the governor's desk before the end of next month. And that is it. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you, Emma. I will be sure next time to praise your great looks and your great voice and all of the information that you always share with jokes and lightheartedness. So thank you. I'm really excited to watch this pipeline finally die and be and have a final announcement that it's not going forward. So that's one of my hopes for 2026. Thank you, Emma. And next we're gonna stay in the Midwest. We're gonna not go very far. We're gonna go over to Indiana with Josh Leffel, where we're gonna hear from Josh, whose experience fighting against CO2 and his heartfelt story is really a reason to remind us all to remind us all why we need to protect our most vulnerable community members and why it's important that we all continue to fight. So Josh, I'm going to hand it over to you, and we're excited to hear about your story.
Can you hear me right now?
We can, yes.
Okay. So my name is Josh Leppel. I live in North Manchester, Indiana, and we learned about carbon capture sequestration last year, about this time of year, actually. My wife and I have two children that suffer from Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and so this fight means a lot to us because we were gifted something that nobody ever gets. We were the recipients of a brand new home, a handicap accessible home built custom just for our kids. It was a total surprise. It came over the telephone, literally from a phone call from my mother at work, and so that changed our lives. We get this house, and my kids move out of their non-handicap accessible home into this handicap accessible one where they're free, they're mobile, they're safe, they're happy. And we lived here for about 4 years, and that's when our life changed. And that's when we found out about carbon capture. I came home and there was flags going up and down our road, and not long after I heard a loud booming on the road. That's when I saw the truck, and that was my introduction to carbon capture. So I had to ask neighbors what was going on, and I found out that the larger landowners had been invited to meetings for almost 2 years about this project that Poet, Ethanol, and Vault 44.01 were partnered in. and they told me they were going to do a carbon capture project, and then I better get ready to fight because there was nothing really good about it. I had contacted well, I went home and researched it, and I didn't like what I heard, so I contacted another organization that helped out a little bit, kind of educated me, and then yeah, I just got involved, and it it wasn't too long that these two companies were forced into a public meeting, March 20th, 2025. And that's when I got to watch the process unfold. I got to meet our commissioners. I got to see these companies put on their display or their presentation of what they wanted to do, which is they would like to sequester 250,000 metric tons of CO2 every year for 12 years. They didn't tell us then how they'd be funded. They didn't tell us what the plan was after 12 years. There's a lot of things they didn't tell us. There was probably 400 people in attendance, and there was one person that was for it. The rest of the people that spoke, and there were plenty, they weren't for it. They were against it. So what I did to start our fight, and I'm not nearly as versed as you guys. You guys have slides and all kinds of cool stuff, and I don't have that. I barely know how to operate my telephone. I've become friends with Emma through this. She's guided me through a lot of this. But what I did was I had like tenacity. When you have two handicapped children, excuse me, the one thing you learn to do is you fight. You have to fight for everything that they have. Nothing comes easy for them. Nothing comes easy at all. So you fight all the time. So that's kind of like second nature for me. It's just fighting, and you learn to stand up. And it doesn't matter who it is, and including this giant corporation. I couldn't care less how big they are. I don't care how many states they operate out of, and I don't care how many employees they have. It means nothing. We're going to beat them. I just didn't know how. So the first thing you have to do that I had to do is get them to admit the truth to me somehow, contradict them in their own meeting. So we had this other organization come to the meeting in 2025. They recorded it, which was very handy. And then during this meeting, they they put up an email that we could use to learn more about it. And actually, I got back up just before the meeting. I was able to contact Poet, have a couple of conversations with them, let them know I was disappointed in what they were doing, let them know about the house, the boys, they didn't care. And I was able to get them to send me a few emails that I thought might be handy in the future. So when it was my turn to talk at the meeting, I got up and I told the story about the boys, our home, and everything at the meeting. And that pretty much set the stage to turn the entire audience against Poet. It did. It turned them. They completely turned against him, and it was like a shark feeding frenzy. They couldn't answer anything. But so I found out that I was able to utilize their email and get them to answer the real question. So it was asked a few times, why are they only doing this for 45Q credit money? And they wouldn't say. Or why are they only doing this for 12 years? And they wouldn't really say. There's a few things they wouldn't say. So I was able to get them to admit it, and I have it in the emails where, it was fascinating that they even answered. I said, your meeting was very scientific. So what's the real reason behind 12-year injection? There must be some reason that you can't go to 13 years or that you don't do it for 11. So what's the scientific specific reason behind the 12-year injection? And I was shocked at the answer, and I can pretty much quote it, was, well, Mr. Leffel, the 12-year injection time coincides directly with the valid time the 45Q credits are good for. And I thought, well, that's really something, because that wasn't said in the meeting. So I had that ammunition. And then I asked them about the current process they use with their CO2 right now, because in the meeting I found it interesting. I had scoured the website. I knew all about it. In the meeting, they said that currently Poet introduces CO2 into the atmosphere through their smokestack. We're going to take that CO2 and safely store it under the ground forever. I thought that was interesting that they emitted it into the atmosphere, because there's more to that on their website. So I asked them about that, and they said, well, right now we operate on a closed carbon cycle. And this becomes really important coming up here, because we operate on a closed carbon cycle where the corn comes in with CO2 already in it. It goes through the fermentation process where that CO2 is released through the smokestack, emitted into the air, where then It is all completely reabsorbed by the next year's corn crop. This introduces no new CO2 into our atmosphere. It's totally regenerative and does not harm you or anybody else. I thought, well, that's really something. Then why would you want to do something like CCS that has so many risks, you know? So that was the meeting. I kept those emails. I was able to do some stuff with them. So, like Emma had said, I knew that public opposition had shut things down before other places. And I thought, how are we going to do it? So, you know, I got active on Facebook, something I never did before. I got active in the meetings. I got vocal. We were able to get a moratorium passed on June 2nd of 2025 that paused the project so that our county could pass an ordinance that would best protect the citizens of our county. And we were blessed with good commissioners. They were trying really hard. They were doing a really good job, and they still are trying to do a really good job. So one thing we wanted to do, well, it went quiet for a while, and then it was told that Poet was trying to have small meetings behind people's backs, closed door meetings, invite only. We got one of our team members to get into that meeting, and one thing she retrieved from it was a letter of support. And this is when things really changed, and that we got the ball rolling. So the letter of support that they wanted people to sign, and there was only 4 or 5 people that showed up to this meeting. They just don't have any support for this project. I put that on Facebook and just let people know about it. Well, they were infuriated. I thought, well, this is going to be how we turn the tide. So we created a letter of opposition, and I sent that around, make sure people looked at it, and I wasn't going to be sued for this, you know. And when it was ready, we let people know, and my driveway became like an interstate. It just did not stop. People just kept coming up the driveway wanting these letters. And some wanted them emailed, some wanted them mailed, some wanted to come and get them. And then pretty soon the community started coming. Strangers were like, hey, I need weird numbers. Like, I need 34. I need 27 of these. And it became apparent. I was like, wow, they're getting them all signed, and they're getting them all signed. And the idea was that I knew our commissioners were on our side, but Poet had started their movement of support. So we wanted to show them what opposition really looks like. Well, that united the entire community. And I mean that quite literally. Like, we started having public CCS letter of opposition signing events. These businesses would look for us and say, hey, I wouldn't mind you coming here, you know, and it would help their business. They got a lot of business when we were there. We went all over the county doing this, extremely successful at this. So we were in the midst of that, and things really changed pretty drastically here in the last few weeks, because one of the people we work with, he's from a university. I can't tell you which one. He doesn't want to be notified, doesn't want known. He let me know that there was a list on the EPA website. And so I found the list. It hadn't been redacted, hadn't been blacked out like everybody else's list was. So this was the AOR list, the area of review. And I'm sure you guys all know what that is. So the weird thing was that nobody knew that we were on it. And I started backdating all the properties. Again, like Emma had said, it's very important to build public opposition, to build unity within your community. So you have to use these tools, these things to do this. So I knew we had something there. I backdated every property. There were 6 or 7 pages. And I looked at the dates of how long people had owned their properties. And I got down to almost the last one on the list. And I knew that property because I almost bought it before this place. We almost bought that. And I knew that the lady, it was a friend of mine, and he had transferred it to his sister. And I knew that she had only owned it from 2020 to maybe 2021. Well, her name was on this list. And so here it is, it's 2026. And I thought, oh my gosh, this list was created back in 2020. They told us, Poet, that they had not looked into this project until about 2023. So we knew then, while we were building our own home, these people had put us on a list, put my land on the list, sent it to the EPA in 2024. But the point is, it was made in 2020. So I put that out. And at about that same time, we had decided maybe we needed to go a little bit further and maybe bring somebody from North Dakota to Indiana so that our community could meet them, um, and see what possible legal representation would look like, see what our legal standing really is, um, concerning a CCS project. So that AOR is what kind of ramped things up. Well, then it gets really interesting. So we didn't want to announce the AOR because we knew people would be furious. They would be infuriated. We didn't want them to be that way without an outlet for their anger. So we get this meeting scheduled for March 17th for a man to come down from North Dakota. Well, as soon as we done that, maybe 3 days later, Poet decided to sue our board of county commissioners for the moratorium. And so now our county commissioners have been sued. They're in the process of being sued. And Poet is claiming that it's for just the very act of putting a moratorium in place. So I guess that's kind of where we're at in Indiana. We did have 1368 pass, which was the DNR will be taking primacy over our project instead of the EPA. So right now it's kind of interesting because we have the county is being sued, and we understood when we put the information out that we were running a risk that they might do something, but we also weighed the risk and said, well, if they do decide to sue because we put our information out, all that should do is build more opposition against their project. And if we're going to do something legally, we should have a lot easier buy-in because, if the county gets sued because people love our county commissioners. Well, that's exactly what happened. The donors started coming out of the woodwork. Hey, we want to fund whatever you're doing on the 17th. We want everything to do with this. Don't worry, you've got money coming, you've got participation. And now people are like, your building isn't big enough that you picked, because the entire community is literally on your side and nobody is for this lawsuit. So it's interesting because the county has theirs going. We very well could have our own going at the exact same time. That's where we're at. That's how we got there. I know it's a long story. I'm just learning this as I go. What I have is a lot of fight inside me. I'm not going to quit. I've let them know that. And our community, as Emma had stated, I learned public opposition is extremely powerful. And you have to, when you find the things that make it click, that strike a nerve, you have to roll with it, and you have to keep it going. I don't know how it's going to end up, but I'm kind of heading up the fight here. I'm the head of the snake. I think they'd love to see me go away. I'm not going to go anywhere. Like I said, I'm probably the most inexperienced person on this entire webinar, but that's where we're at. So,
Well, thank you, Josh. And I'm sure it's not true that you're the most inexperienced. And even if you were, that's okay, because all of us are learning every day, and we don't
well,
need fancy slides to tell our
one more
story.
thing.
So yeah, go ahead.
I have one more thing if I have a second. Just one more
Yeah,
quick thing.
sure.
It's very important. So I also learned just a few weeks ago from a friend of mine that Poet had, and a lot of you probably know this, I don't know, Poet had partnered with NASCAR. And they partnered with NASCAR to produce zero carbon fuel with no emissions. Well, in our public meeting we had in March 2025, they specifically told us the reasons that they needed to do this was to produce low carbon fuel. Zero carbon would be nice so that they could enter the sustainable aviation fuel market. And it's becoming weird because they tell us that they're producing fuel for NASCAR. It's zero carbon fuel. Not only that, but this fuel is commercially available to the public. And I can tell you the process they're using to make it, that they're so proud of, it's on their own website, is the closed carbon regenerative cycle that they use right across the street from my house. That is the one that they are bragging about. That is their claim to fame, and they do not mention CCS at all in this zero carbon fuel that they currently produce, the same fuel that they say they cannot produce unless they pump this CO2 into the ground. So that's very interesting to a lot of us.
So that's very interesting. Maybe Emma, we can plant a bug in your ear for a NASCAR anti-NASCAR campaign or some type of, I don't know, to kind of get accountability there. But anyway, Josh, I really appreciate you for sharing the fight that's going on in Indiana, and especially for telling us about your family and why you're fighting. And so thank you. And I think there are so many of us on this call that are also in this, similar situations of just not giving up on this fight. And so we are here with allies, and we really appreciate you. So next we have one more Midwestern state that we are going to swing into, and that is Illinois. We're going to pass it over to Pam Richard, who is a co-director of the Eco Justice Collaborative, who is based in Champaign, Illinois. And again, she is the co-founder and coordinator of the Illinois Coalition to Stop CO2 Pipelines. Pam, we are excited to hear from you.
Thanks, Haley, and thanks to everybody who's here tonight, and in particular to all the speakers who are sharing what's happening across the country. I hope everybody is finding this as valuable as I am. And Josh, to you, I would say we all started there. Every single one of us started in the place you're at now. I didn't know anything about CCS. I had no clue. So big crash learning curve, and here we go. And the other thing I'd say as I start out, sometimes you win. And this is a story of a decent victory. It's not a perfect victory, but a decent victory that was achieved in coalition and partnership with other organizations and people many of whom are on this call. Next slide, please. So, what is the Muhammad Aquifer? It's an aquifer located in central Illinois that sits between, say, 50 and 500 feet below the surface, has a surface area of 3,000 square miles, and it provides drinking water to about 1 million of us here in this part of the state. It serves businesses, it serves industries, and it serves a farm community because they draw water to irrigate their crops. It was designated as a sole source aquifer in 2011, which sounds like a mouthful, right? Sole source aquifer. Because the US EPA determined that if it were to be contaminated, there would be no readily available alternative water supply for central Illinois, which sounds rather crazy since I just told you it covers 3,000 square miles. Listen on as we go. Next slide. How might it become contaminated? Most of you on this call know about CCS, so I'm not gonna talk too much about this. But the leak pathways are here: injection wells, caprock failure, abandoned wells. Here in Illinois, we're talking a lot about triggered seismicity and natural earthquakes that can damage the well and the cap. But when it mixes with CO2, mixes with water, it can leach out heavy metals from the rock. And those heavy metals can cause some pretty serious uh, health issues like cancers, brain damage, memory loss, cardiovascular disease, kidney damage, birth defects, and more. Next slide, please. So, as we were working on a regulatory bill here, that would be SB 1289. We all memorize our bills numbers forever, I think. We did that because there was a growing number of CCS projects that were coming to Illinois. And four of those happened to be within or near the footprint of the aquifer. You can see them listed on the left panel there. And while the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition did get stronger regulations in than Class 6 in our bill, we failed to get a ban on injecting CO2 through that aquifer or storing it under as well. And so some of us thought, well, this is an important resource and we need to start taking action and we need to do it pretty quickly. So as we didn't get that passed, we waited all of a month and began moving forward because, next slide, uh, what you can see here is that our bill requires the sequestration operator rather to provide an alternative supply of water if that water is contaminated. Well, if you heard earlier, the US EPA determined if our water gets contaminated, there is no alternative supply of water to be had. And in our case, it's all about the economics. And the way it works here with our water districts and the way things are set up, it is economically infeasible to either replace that water from the Mahomet or from surface water, at least from public water suppliers. And so that's why all the water everywhere, but we have a problem with being able to get it to the people who need it. Next slide. So why this part of Illinois and why the Muhammad? So in explaining this to others, as we did our dog and pony show, about 50 of them actually across communities across the state and with legislators, we superimpose this image of the aquifer on what is thought of as the sweet spot, which means this is the area in the Illinois basin that has one of the largest capacity, shall I say, for storing CO2. So that's why it's attractive to folks like you saw on the other slide, to developers who are there or close to this sweet spot. And then, of course, you've got the pressures that we've all, many of us have learned about that have come about by the 45Q tax credit, which Josh just talked about a little bit. And so Illinois has become a quote target for CO2, and the aquifer was thought to be one of the best places. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I think was interesting here is that um, the interesting thing here is the story about ADM hadn't happened yet. But while we were beginning the bill and working with legislators and had the bill introduced, the leak of that happened at ADM Decatur did in fact break. And that helped us a lot because you could say, hey, the flagship project in the country that's located right here in Decatur actually leaked CO2. And the projects that were being considered by the US EPA, and there's more that haven't yet made their way to the US EPA, were 50 times that of ADM's project. And today, as we keep getting them added, they're over 105 times the size of that existing ADM project. What kind of a business decision is it when you have one well, two monitoring wells, one project that have stored 4.5 tons CO2, and it leaks, to then be able to process and authorize and approve something over 105 times that size? Many folks thought it wasn't such a good idea. Next slide, please. So I'm sort of lost. What? I'm so sorry. If I've not gone on to my slides quickly enough. Could you tell me what slide number this is, Isabel? Or maybe not. Um, so I think I just talked about the leaks. What I will say is these leaks had mechanical failure, and they had corrosion, they had a poor design, and even though the leaks have occurred, and ADM says no problem, many of us have questions because the EPA as well failed. They didn't issue a notice of violation until well into the leaks, like the leak was in March, and they didn't issue a notice of violation until the following September, and on it goes. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I think helped us in our campaign is the fact that this wasn't the first time our aquifer had been threatened. People's Gas had a natural gas leak in the same Muhammad Aquifer, Mount Simon Formation, below the Muhammad Aquifer, and that caused quite a bit of water contamination and quite a bit of concern because the People's Gas refused to do anything about it, even initially admitting that it was their issue and their fault. And as you can see here, there were lawsuits. And by 2020, the estimate of providing replacement water to those affected residents was $10 million. And it still hasn't happened. That's 8 years. It's now 10 years. I should have updated the slide. They still don't have replacement water. They're operating with filters and bottled water. Next slide, please. And the same thing with Nicor gas nearby. Again, this was stored in the Mount Simon Formation, not under the aquifer, but it's been leaking and made its way through the rock that is supposed to seal and permanently sequester the methane. And methane and CO2 behave similarly. They're both buoyant and rise to the surface. And this one's been leaking since the 1960s. They capture the gas. they put it back in the ground. It comes out, they capture the gas, they put it in the ground. You can hear it bubbling. If you go visit it, you can see that it's damaged the farm fields. And our state, unfortunately, isn't doing a whole lot to help resolve this issue. Next slide, please. So all of this information was shared a lot with the public and government leaders and our state reps and senators. We were able to get the audiences of a few caucuses, which helped us educate people about the bill. And the conclusion we drew is regulation is a risk. We need the certainty of a ban. Next slide, please. We did pass the bill. But as we got closer and closer, labor groups began lobbying legislators and began making their opposition quite clear. Without taking the time to go into detail, I should share that their testimonies that happened during hearings and the testimony of Prairie State, who is not Prairie State, Prairie Research Institute, who is the premier CCS arm of the state of Illinois, very pro CCS, and made it really difficult to pass the bill. And for a while, we weren't sure it was going to happen. Next slide, please. So what made the difference? And a lot of these tactics, I think you heard Emma talk about, and Josh and others on this call tonight. But we did get resolutions from counties and cities and municipalities that are in the footprint of the aquifer to say, hey, we need you to pass this bill because we did work on county ordinances and some of them have been adopted. And Champaign County, my county, is almost there. Next slide, please. And we did a petition with constituent signatures that spanned the entire state. This wasn't just a central Illinois issue. This was a statewide issue. People realized access to clean water is a human right. 22 mayors urged legislative action. 12 legislators whose districts are in the footprint demanded action in a letter to Governor Pritzker. The co-sponsors kept increasing and increasing and increasing. It was amazing to watch because of the efforts of our coalition and our two sponsors who really believed in getting this bill passed. One of our partner organizations held a lobby day. And one of the things that I think is really interesting here that may be a bit different than other fights is we decided because we had just opened the door to a bill that we had negotiated, and everybody's looking at us saying, well, if you thought it could be regulated, why are you back here now, right? And so to that response, we said pressure from industry. We had to do regulations. Many of us had hoped we could do a ban. That wasn't feasible. But in this instance, we need to have a ban. So we had a testimony and a white paper that was prepared by a professor that I will share in the link here if anybody's talking about protecting their drinking water, that I think really made the difference because he was able to talk about risks in the scientific way. So there was the organizing that took place. There was the clear danger that I think we painted to the aquifer. But in my view, having that expert helped push us over the edge. So we have a ban, and that's the great story. The last thing I'll say is on the day the bill went to the Senate floor for a vote, we were called in, those of us who are working closely with the senator, my Senator Faraci, to talk to the Senate leader, who said, I need to tell you that if you want this bill to pass, here's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to accept that the second largest CCS project in Illinois, which is in the recharge area, is going to be exempt from the bill. Labor wants that. You got to do it or it will not go forward. And the second thing is we're going to have a study as part of this bill that is going to reopen the ability to look at the recharge area and the aquifer itself for suitability of carbon storage. Can it be done safely? That's the question here. Well, that study hasn't been funded yet, but if it is and when it is, you can bet that all of those who work to pass this bill will be participating in that process as well, because we don't believe that CCS is safe, can ever be safe, and why would you risk a sole source aquifer like this in central Illinois? Thanks much.
Thank you, Pam. I always learn so much from about how to organize and get people to sign letters and things like that from you. So thank you for sharing the work that you all have done in Illinois. All right, we have one last state to go to, and we're going to travel a little bit down to the south. We're going to finally head to Alabama, where communities are just beginning to learn about a proposed CCS project called the Pine Hills Sequestration Hub, which, just as an ad lib, is truly one of the biggest sequestration projects I've ever seen. And so I'm sure Gabby will talk more about that. But Gabby is joining us tonight to talk about her organization, the newly formed Covington County Against Alabama Carbon Capture. So, Gabby, thanks for joining us, and off to you.
Thank you, and happy anniversary to everyone. I am very thankful that this network exists because what's happening in Alabama has been unfolding very fast. So I'm actually a civil and environmental engineer, but I have worked in the solid waste management industry. And so I have spent my career working on the other side of permit applications, actually putting them together. And so when this popped up about 6 months ago, I didn't know much about carbon capture, no more than most people in my county. And so for the last 6 months, we've kind of dug in deep on this. And this photo right here is actually of the Conecuh National Forest. So on a later slide, you'll see that this actually sits right at the edge of the project footprint. So I just want to kind of tell y'all how our community is starting to fight back. What could be the largest carbon storage facility in the world. Next slide, please. So this is how Reliant describes their project on their own website. They call it Alabama's flagship carbon storage facility. And last October, one of our county commissioners started getting calls from constituents, and they were asking about testing that they had observed on some of the local timberland. And after doing some digging, he found out that the company Reliant was pursuing a carbon capture and sequestration project. And so he had asked them to come speak at a county commission meeting, which is what that news article was about. And we had our community, you can't see all of us on the edges, but it was a packed house, which for a county of about 40,000 people was impressive. Next slide. So what they propose is to inject 30 million metric tons of CO2 per year through 44 injection wells across 74,000 acres. So this would be directly below the aquifer system that Covington County and much of the Florida Panhandle relies on for drinking water. The permit application was filed with the EPA in July, and they actually issued a notice of deficiency in August that the application was incomplete. And then we found out in October. So as of tonight, they still have not responded to that notice of deficiency, which actually pertained to the area of review. They did not have apparently have everything shown on their application that should have been in the area of review, but we have not been able to see that because everything in the application has been redacted. So if you'll go to that next slide, please. So my looks like stuff shifted a little bit. I was not sure what happened to the image, but so I was just trying to put the scale into perspective. So every circle on this map is a CCS project that is currently injecting CO2 in North America, according to the IEA's CCUS database as of April 2025. But the size of the circles is proportional to how much it injects each year. So if you see the large green circle over Alabama, that is the project. It looks like my text kind of got shifted off to the side, and I had actually put like another circle on top of it to kind of make it stand out a little bit differently. What that is, but that very large green dot is what Pine Hills would be. Next slide. So once the word had got out, we all started asking questions, and we weren't really getting unbiased answers. And like Haley said, we formed the Covenant County, Alabama Against Carbon Storage. We've, like I said, we've had that commission meeting. We have filed public records requests. We have an attorney that is appealing the redactions from that FOIA request, and we are still waiting on a response from that as well. And then we connected with this national organization, and it's helped a lot to hear what everybody else is going through. We've been trying to look through what we can of those permit documents. We've learned a lot about the Class 6 wells. And we're trying to grow. We've had some neighboring counties have signed resolutions opposing the project. We've had a lot of groups kind of starting to reach out. And this has not been a partisan fight in a very conservative community. We've been trying to send the message that whether you vote red or blue, we all drink the same water, and we've got a lot of community opposition coming together on this. Next slide, please. So far, we've had 4 bills introduced in the Alabama legislature this session, and most of them have been carried by my local representative, Matthew Hammett. I should have included that we also found out that in 2024, they had passed HB 327, which kind of gave the framework for CCS in Alabama. We found out that the Pine Hills people had been working on this for a while. And that bill actually created the framework for the pore space agreements, and that it tied it to the landowners separate from all other mineral rights. And then you'll see later that Reliant has pore space agreements in place for that 74,000 acres. So another fun fact is that Alabama has the longest constitution in the world. And this is largely because counties here have very little power to govern themselves. So most local needs require a statewide constitutional amendment. So the first bill that was introduced was HB 61, which would be a constitutional amendment. And if it passes, Covenant County voters will have the opportunity in November to decide whether we want to allow Class 6 wells here. And then SB 266 is a companion bill to that was introduced by our state senator. And it actually has passed the Alabama Senate, and it's made its way back to the House, and it is stuck in the same committee as HB 61 is at this point as well. He's also introduced HB 428, and this would require local governing body approval before any Class 6 injection wells go in. And in our state, we have to go through a process like that to permit or modify a landfill. So we said, that's waste. This is waste. Why do we not have the same local consent regulations for that? So, and it is also stuck in committee right now. And then the other bill that he introduced is HB 431, and it started out with a 20% tax on CO2 stored. And his premise was that if you're going to collect billions in federal 45Q tax credits, Alabama communities should share in that. But I found out today that it had been replaced with a substitute bill that would tax at a much smaller per ton fee structure. But it did also include a prohibition on out-of-state CO2 and a ban on storing CO2 more than 50 miles from its source. And it actually was reported out of committee today. So not sure how to feel about that one just yet, but that's the only one that seems to be getting some traction at this point. And then next slide. And so on this map, this shows the pore space ownership that the Reliant has obtained for Pine Hills. We were able to cross-reference it with our county's GIS records. And you can see over on the left that Connecticut National Forest sits right at the edge of it. And that's federal public land. And just about 2 weeks ago, we found out the Forest Service had actually opened nearly all of it to oil and gas leasing. I know the Center for Biological Diversity is also leading the objection on that. So it kind of feels like our area has the fossil fuel industry has kind of put their crosshairs on us. So where do we stand? Like I said, the permit is stalled right now. They have not responded to that notice of deficiency. We're waiting to hear back on that FOIA appeal. And the Alabama legislative session adjourns March 27th. So we've only got about 16 more days for any of those bills to make their way through. So we're pushing hard. Like I said, we're very new to all of this. Um, I'm hoping that HB 61 or SB 266 makes it through where we can vote on this and put a stop to this specific project. But overall, I think at least that local consent, because I know our county commission is opposed to the project, and if they had that ability, they would be able to reject this project. So we don't really have any big wins yet, but we've learned a lot in the last 6 months, and this group has been a huge help. Um, and I've learned a couple other things tonight too that we plan to use. And the QR code on the left side of the screen is actually takes you to a Google map, so you can kind of see the area of those properties. And then the QR code on the right side of the screen takes you to our group's Facebook page if you want to kind of follow what we're doing here in Alabama.
Amazing. Thank you, Gabby. And thank you everyone for hanging in with us. We have one last speaker, which I think is, I'm not saying this just because he's my boss, but I think is going to be the most, one of the more interesting things to learn is like how you can plug in this year. What's going on in the policy world? So at the federal level, we're tracking important legislation as we come to the third year of trying to reauthorize, the agency that would oversee CO2 pipelines, PHMSA. So I want to turn to Jim Walsh, the policy director at Food and Water Watch, to tell us how we can influence Congress this year and plug in.
Thank you, Haley, and thank you to all the speakers and all the guests that are here tonight. I want to just really recognize that one thing is really clear is that when we fight, we can win. And we're bringing together leaders from all over the country that are fighting projects all over the country. And the project developers who are pushing these things aren't only working in your states, they're also working in Washington, D.C., at our nation's capital to make more profits, to make more money, to stand in the way of our projects. And that is what we're working to do, is to counteract a lot of that, to make sure that policymakers in Washington, D.C. are actually educated about the impacts of these projects on their communities and on states, the dangers of these pipelines and injection wells, and the wastefulness of these billions of dollars in tax credits. Next slide. And we actually this year coming up have some really good opportunities moving forward. And within that, the pipeline safety legislation is moving in Congress. It's moved through two committees. It's teed up in a third committee very soon, and maybe part of a larger permitting bill that may move later this year. The permitting bill, we're paying very closely attention to. It sounds kind of, just like, oh, permitting. But what this could do is actually do more to open the floodgates for the carbon capture industry. There's real risk there that this could actually override state eminent domain laws and grant that authority within federal institutions, that it could fast track CO2 pipelines, or potentially eliminate or weaken Clean Water Act protections that are in place for injection wells. As we heard from Pam, the regulations on injection wells are already inadequate, and weakening those would go even further. There's a chance that there will be a big tech bill that moves. And this is really important because I'm sure a lot of you have heard about data center developments. Well, the data center industry is actually looking to use carbon capture to actually greenwash their data centers and say, look, we're protecting the environment by using carbon capture technology, which we know isn't true. But we expect there could be provisions in that legislation that may actually create loopholes and other things to benefit the carbon capture industry. Offshore CO2 injections is another proposal that we expect the administration to move forward later this year with new rules to allow them to start injecting CO2 under the Outer Continental Shelf. We already see what a disaster it is online. And when we think about the BP Horizon disaster that happened and the disaster that happened in Illinois, you bring those two things together and how challenging it would be to actually stop a well blowout of carbon dioxide underneath the ocean, and to also even enforce and oversee that infrastructure becomes even harder when it's offshore. There's opportunities to build support for ending enhanced oil recovery this year and closing loopholes on 45Q. The administration actually over the holidays in December actually created a new way to file to essentially for the industry to file their 45Q taxes that if the EPA doesn't act on a certain guidelines by June, then the industry is able to actually instead of filing information with EPA, they can just hire third-party verifiers to sign off on their work and then not even submit those to IRS. And then what they would submit to IRS is not the actual documents that have been verified, but a form that says that somebody has signed off on these documents that's paid by the project developer. So huge loopholes. And we also have opportunities through all this to build long-term power by bringing all these fights together to actually create a collective voice to speak out against the carbon capture industry. Next slide, please. On pipeline safety, there are some core safety concerns that we need to consider here and that we're raising concerns about. As these things move forward, these are the sorts of things we need to make sure that are not included or included in the bill and that our policymakers know the impacts of these and ensuring local control and setbacks we've heard about tonight to increase transparency. Also, real big fears that Congress may actually codify moving forward CO2 standards that would be developed by the industry themselves rather than Congress actually setting standards for themselves, for the industry to make sure they're safe. And I think the last thing we need is the carbon capture industry telling us what is safe and having that be the standard for safety. Next slide, please. On permitting reform, these are real fears of what could be moving forward in permitting reform. The pay-to-pay pipeline permitting, which is actually something we were able to stop from moving forward last year. Rolling back project reviews. This is a concern broadly within the federal government right now that there may be efforts to actually prevent and block efforts for the federal government to evaluate projects to look at the broad impacts that they would have on environment and public health concerns, and the rollback to clean water and the eminent domain concerns I talked about earlier. And I put Lucy and Charlie Brown in there because this is literally something that keeps coming up and that they talk about as like bipartisan negotiations that are going to help improve energy costs and help to improve safety while letting the industry move forward more quickly with projects. But all that seems to be happening with these permit reform bills that move forward is that project standards get weakened and the public gets left with having to deal with more of the impacts of energy infrastructure. And I liken that to Charlie Brown continuing to walk up and swing at that football. Next slide, please. The mega tech bill could be moving very quickly. And something to remember with this is these data centers that are going in use tremendous amounts of energy. And with that energy comes the carbon dioxide emissions the industry wants to capture. But because these subsidies are so lucrative and so big, we're worried that the data center industry may actually be using these tax credits to actually help cover the cost for these expensive projects, giving not only a subsidy to the carbon capture industry, but also giving a subsidy to big tech, which is, the $1 trillion industry in the country. Next slide, please. And there's also something really important here with enhanced oil recovery. And this is where we see 90% of the carbon dioxide going is for enhanced oil recovery. A lot of times lawmakers and others will talk about this as a climate solution. This is a subsidy that is largely being used to fund the oil and gas industry. And because of these subsidies, the break-even point now by industry analysts is estimated to be at $16 per barrel. So if anybody's been paying attention to, oil prices now, we're up near $100 per barrel. And when you think about a $16 break-even point for extracting CO2, that's a lot of profit. And that is being balanced on the backs of taxpayers. And this is the core driver of the carbon capture infrastructure in the country. As you heard from, the speaker who has joined us from Indiana was saying that, they're planning a project for 12 years. Why? Because that's how long 45Q is slated to last for. Next slide, please. And this is we're also very concerned about the safe harbor implementation going forward, literally removing agency reporting and allowing paid contractors to do the verifying, with really no congressional or public oversight. And the reason that is because all of these documents are submitted with tax forms. And when you submit tax forms to the IRS, the public can't see them. Congress can't see them. The only people that get to see them are the people that work for IRS. And what that means is that we're not going to have the level of evaluation that we need for this tax credit that has literally seen at least $1 billion in fraudulent claims made, according to the Inspector General's office, and potentially more that go without being noticed. And so this is something else that we're working actively to watchdog and keep an eye on, and we need to be speaking out against. Next slide, please. The offshore CO2 injections, this is one of the biggest stories of the year that isn't being talked about. And, within this, we're going to see tremendous implications for the tax credits because the industry knows there's tremendous amounts of oil and gas in the Gulf that they can use that CO2 to extract. But it's also harder to enforce those tax credits because there's actually loopholes in the tax credit that say that, well, if you leak CO2, if it doesn't count as being leaked unless it gets into the atmosphere. Well, if it's leaking out in the ocean, that's a real question about whether or not it's making it in the atmosphere. And so you could potentially have a leaky well that's continuing to pollute our oceans and acidify it and impact, life there and the fishing industry and other sorts of issues. And have an industry that continues to collect that tax credit, even though they're not doing the thing that they're supposed to do with it. There's also concerns with co-locating these facilities with LNG facilities. So liquefied natural gas is the core mechanism that's used to transport methane gas or frack gas overseas. And they're looking at co-locating CO2 with LNG projects. And the blast areas of some of these LNG projects can be literally a dozen miles. And so co-locating that with a CO2 project can create significant concerns and challenges if there's a leak or a rupture for either of these, projects, but also the workers who work on these LNG facilities and elsewhere maybe aren't going to be able to maintain and equipment properly because of a CO2 leak. So there's a lot of real new dangers that will come about because of this offshore CO2 injection plans that the industry is putting forward, along with the more pipelines and more infrastructure along with it. Next slide, please. And so one of the big things we need to do together is build power and build long-term power. And so that's a lot of what we're working to do through the work within the CCS Action Network. By coordinating call-in days and petitionings, we can educate policymakers about these concerns, educate them about the concerns that we have, but also through those call-in days and petition gathering, we're able to talk to our neighbors and community members to encourage them to make phone calls and get them to ask questions. Well, why should I care about this? Gives you an opportunity to talk to them about these issues and what's being experienced in your community so that they can get active and speak out. We're looking to plan more fly-ins to Washington, D.C. this year. We're going to hold more trainings and educational events, encourage people to hold more district meetings and bring these discussions right to your policymakers in D.C. And we're going to bring more fights in here and help support local fights. Really glad to see Gabby here from Mississippi, who just joined us recently, and we worked with her to put together a forum to help educate people in Mississippi Alabama about the projects that they're having there. And so really glad, to help support these local fights on the ground and tie all this together. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks for quickly going through your slides. And thank you to everyone for hanging in. I know we ran over time, so I appreciate you for sticking on. But before we close out, I will just say I saw many of the questions that were. Oh, if we can go back one more click, Isabel, sorry. But if I saw that many of the questions that were asked in the chat already got answered. So I think to save time, we're going to go ahead and skip Q&A for tonight. But before we close out, I teased a little bit of an announcement. So just quickly, I just want to just announce something which I think is pretty exciting. So over the last year, the Action Network has grown significantly, and our work has really expanded beyond just working on injection wells or just working on pipelines, and more than just sharing information. We clearly are organizing, we're improving safety, and we're building a national movement around stopping CO2 and CCS projects. So while we recognize that, and we also recognize that in all fairness, the description of our name could be of our group could be a little bit better and more descriptive of who we are, what we're fighting for, and who we all represent. So over the last couple of months, the steering committee for the CCS Action Network has been meeting and discussing the possibility of a name change. And so tonight, I am excited to share that the CCS Action Network will actually become the Stop Carbon Capture Alliance. You can click those. Thank you. And we will, with that will come, that name change will come a couple more exciting announcements, like things like a formalized website or action platform that we can sign petitions on, and things like a logo. So more exciting things to come as we formalize and change our name. So with that, I am going to close us out, and thank you all so much again to our speakers and to the nearly 100 people who registered tonight to join us. There is so much work happening across the country, and all of it is incredibly inspiring, and it just really shows how powerful communities can be when we stick together. So, as I said in the beginning, we will follow up with a recording and resources later on to everyone who registered. And I hope you have a great night, and I really appreciate you. And thank you for being part of the Stop Carbon Capture Alliance. Thank you all.